welcome to my channel, Lee's Stitch Lab. I'm Lee. This is going to be the first episode of a monthly series that, actually I'm not sure what we're calling. I'm checking my notes here. Maybe Stitch Lab Monthly Blueprint, Monthly Update. Anyway, while we go through the episode, I thought we could do a little bit of crocheting together and go through all of the topics that we covered so far this month, which is pretty much like structure and crochet clothing. Let's get into all of the granny square pieces that I've made starting from 3 months into crocheting all the way up until about 3 years of crochet experience, which is where I'm at now. And I want you to let me know in the comments as you're watching what your favorite granny square piece was, and I'll tell you which mine were. Welcome to level 1. 3 months into crocheting, I quickly realized that blankets and coasters were not going to teach me how to make real crochet clothing. So I went straight for granny squares and made my first sweater without a pattern. I didn't want a square neckline, so my first innovation was born out of necessity. I had no idea what I was doing, but the result instantly made a splash. The subtle shape change around the neck was unlike anything that apparently crocheters were used to seeing. And it became the first pattern request that I ever received and happily obliged with. It only takes 16 squares. But what if I added sleeves? Well, so I did. My raw wool beginner piece immediately stretched out in places that I didn't want it to. It wasn't a failure. It was the first loud warning signal that I might have hit a limit as to what this simple structure could actually support. I filed that lesson away, and that's when I saw all of your balaclava makes trending on social media. That influence was the perfect challenge, so I made one. Sans pattern, of course. But I needed a bigger leap. I thought, what if I just went nuts and added zippers? So this is where I stopped thinking about crochet like blankets and started thinking about it like couture. I dissected the garments I was sewing, studied high fashion pieces, and became obsessed with proving that any garment technique could be translated into crochet. And once I started, those experiments escalated fast. I recreated the top of a blouse that I had designed, complete with a functional zipper closure and high collar. And then tackled structure with a Gautier-inspired crochet granny square vest, complete with buckles and faux pocket flaps. The question stopped being if I could do it and started being how long could I force these squares to behave. I added boning to fingerless elbow length gloves. Can you imagine boning in crochet? That required creating special channels to hold the boning. If you ever want a video on the technique, just let me know in the comments. It's an odd one. I freehanded the fingerless glove shape surprisingly easily. A granny square hood soon followed to match, cementing my belief that no garment detail was off limits. It felt like I had unlocked a superpower, so naturally I decided to tackle the one thing that everybody said could only be done with basic rectangles: a pair of granny square shorts. I added patch pockets and an elasticated waistband and inner thigh shaping, a technique that can be difficult to understand in any woven textile. I wore these everywhere. My confidence was sky high. And then my scrap yarn quilt inspired hoodie blew up overnight. It was made of tight, non-stretch, single crochet pieces. I thought that I had mastered structure, but that's where I'd messed up. You see, I just assumed the same rules that I had used to make this pieced together scrap yarn hoodie would apply to granny squares, and they don't. That assumption set me straight into my next challenge, treating granny squares like they're fabric. So for the next 2 pieces, I tightened everything up. Smaller, denser squares, hoping that they would then act like cloth. Disaster. I made a halter top that stretched and gaped the second I put it on. I made an oversized t-shirt. By its second outing, it had sagged into a shapeless tunic dress. I'd hit a wall and I questioned every stitch. It felt pointless. I couldn't stand to look at that t-shirt, and I couldn't just like leave it either. So I ripped it apart and I salvaged every square just 2 weeks after finishing it. And then came 6 long, doubt-filled months of trial and error in slowly reshaping it into an asymmetrical sweater. It turned out really well, but it wasn't the victory I was looking for. I had admitted defeat and made peace with the sag, blending the Granny Square's flaws into the design instead of fighting them. But that couldn't be the final answer, could it? I refuse to believe that Granny Squares would forever be only useful for blankets, saggy things, and compromise. I just couldn't end there. I kept crocheting. I had tried out some like bobbles and puff stitches. They were sturdy, solid, and fun to look at. And then I had an idea. What if I tried to make a granny square in like a flower shape and I used like a puff stitch to form the petals? The look was really beautiful, but the structure, that was a shock. So I started experimenting. A sturdy puff stitch inside the classic frame of a granny square, smaller hook, tighter puffs, and then it held. It didn't stretch. It stood on its own, and that was it. The missing piece. The first thing I did was grab the pattern for that saggy t-shirt failure and rebuild it with the new square. Same number of squares, but this time it didn't stretch out. No flop, just structure. Everything had been the same except for this one stitch. I was hooked. To push it further, I stitched puffed granny squares into silk organza and made a dress, complete with a very heavy crocheted skirt. Runway ready proof that the theory worked in the most dramatic way possible. And the secret turned out to be simple. Re-engineer the granny square so it behaves more like a sturdier fabric. The more structure you give the square, the more ambitious your garments can become. And I shared the tutorial for the new puffed granny square, but I couldn't stop there. I had to prove it in a real piece and do something that I hadn't been able to before. And you've been looking at the proof this entire time. The answer to what my favorite granny square piece is might have been really obvious based on what I'm wearing, even though, yes, I said this is like my defeat asymmetrical sweater. I really love it and I wear it all the time. One of the reasons I think that I enjoy it so much is because I folded over this granny square, which gave me the idea of like a cuff situation. But then the other piece, one of my favorite pieces ever, is that very first vest that I shared that really was just kind of like a sleeveless sweater thing. It was the first crochet piece that I'd ever made and designed myself. The footage of me in the snow wearing it, I put it together like that day. And then I shared and it was such a lovely response. It's hard to not have that be your favorite piece when it was my first introduction into kind of making and designing in the world of crochet. Now, that being said, I really love crochet. I think it's an incredible way to find joy and self-expression, especially through crochet clothing. Not just like make things that feel so self-expressive and beautiful, but also to be able to wear them and to have things that actually fit you. I think that crochet shapes, structure, and 3D curvature in crochet is really fascinating and something that's really well documented in the world of amigurumi, but not so much in the way that we think about crochet clothing, which is why I want to dig into it a little bit further. The first time I broke down hyperbolic crochet, the comment section turned into a math fight. Debates, stitch count wars, full-on flat circle confusion. My example was right, but I had made it sound a lot like math class. So let's talk about that wild ruffle you get when you squeeze too many stitches into too tight of a space. This is a hyperbolic curve and it's kind of a big deal. Let's break it down. Say we're creating a crochet piece. We start with a chain of 2 and then every row onward we add 1 more stitch each row. If you plot that on a graph, rows on the x-axis and stitches on the y-axis, you'll get a nice tidy little straight line, flat, balanced, simple, and the edge of your crochet piece will match. But what if you want something a little bit more interesting? We're going to need to start with a fixed rate of increase. That means every so many stitches, we're going to increase by a certain amount, and we're going to hold that for every row. You could add a stitch every other stitch, every third stitch, every 10th stitch, just as long as you keep that pattern going forward every round. Here's the mind-bending part. Even though your increase rate is staying fixed, the result when you plot it is actually exponential. And then the more stitches you add per row, the steeper that curve gets. Your crochet project follows along with that curve, rippling, curling, and exploding outward. This is your hyperbolic curve in action. And once you understand this, it lets you visualize how dramatic that silhouette will be before you ever even begin to crochet. And that's how I build fashion, by taking this math and matching it to the drama that I want. Okay, so how can we visualize this in the real world? So let's say we wanted a ruffled sleeve. For ease, we're gonna say we just start with 10 stitches. And say we decide to increase every other stitch. So every second stitch, we're gonna increase by 1 and hold that as our fixed rate. Seems easy, right? Round 3, you're at 34 stitches. Cute little flare, totally manageable. But by round 10, you're at 549 stitches in one row. That's like 6 feet of crochet. Keep going to round 20, you're staring down 31,618 stitches, more than 230 feet of ruffle. That's entire skein of yarn just to get through half of a ruffle level of chaos. Because our yarn consumption and the weight of our piece are also both growing exponentially. It's also when that Mean Girls quote, "The limit does not exist," stops being funny and starts sounding like a haunting prediction of when our project is actually gonna end. But now that you get this concept, it allows you to be in charge. Big and dramatic little ripple, you get to decide. So why did such a simple explanation cause such chaos in the comments? Well, crochet geometry is kind of wild, but there are really only 3 basic shapes that you need to understand, and they can be explained really well as different social media posting energies. Okay, so a flat circle. That's your curated soft launch grid. Clean aesthetic, no drama. You increase your stitches at a chill fixed rate, usually 6 per round, to keep it balanced and, well, flat. Now a sphere, that's your chaotic vacation photo dump energy. It starts like a flat circle, big, bold, confident, but then you pull it back. You stop increasing, hold steady for a bit, and then maybe even start decreasing. The stitch energy collapses inwards, softens, and closes in on itself. And suddenly you're back home in full cozy mode. A perfect contained little orb of calm, still dramatic, but also introverted. And then there's your hyperfixation phase. You just discovered a new show. You're duetting every scene, dropping theories, stitching drama. It's unhinged and you're posting nonstop. That's your hyperbolic curve, and it's kind of iconic. You're still increasing at a fixed rate, but it's way too fast of a rate to stay flat. The stitches pile up, the edges ripple, and suddenly you're creating chaos in the most beautiful way. So that's why the comments got spicy. Some of you were focused on the math behind creating a flat circle, which is valid, but forgot that ruffles are in the same family, just dialed way up. A flat circle is calm, a ruffle is the same, just overstimulated and thriving, like your brain at 3 a.m. after 7 iced coffees and a TikTok spiral. And for my knitters out there, the concept works exactly the same way. It's just math after all, but you see it much less often because you run out of space on your needles to keep this massive length of ripple much faster than a crocheter will run out of yarn. Hyperbolic crochet I think is so fascinating that you can actually watch the math build in front of your eyes, but it really is so important when you are thinking about a ruffled skirt, a ruffled sleeve, like all these different things, which are concepts that when you're doing like fashion design come up a lot, right? Because ruffles, gussets, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but basically shaping of garments is really important. So after coming up with that whole structure concept and the granny squares, I wanted to share how to do the puffed granny stitch, because I wanted you to be able to create that puff stitch on your own should you want to, in order to then try out something like our puffed granny stitch t-shirt. So grab your hook. We can do this together. I'm going to show you how you can puff up your granny squares to create show-stopping crochet fashion. We're going to begin with a slip knot on our hook, and we're going to chain 4. Then we're going to take our hook, go through that very first little stitch, and pull our yarn through with a little slip stitch so that we form a nice chain, which we can begin to crochet into. Sounds a lot like the beginning of a granny square, because it is. For every round, we're going to start with a chain of 2 that's going to replace what would otherwise be a double crochet. So we're going to chain 2. And then we're going to begin our puff stitch. So the way we do this is you yarn over, take your hook, go into the center of your ring, grab your yarn, and pull it back out. You want to make sure that you fully extend your hook back out to the length of that first chain of 2, just to make your puff stitches nice and big. So that's our first one. Now we're going to do it 4 more times. So yarn over, into the loop, come back out. There's 2, yarn over, into the loop, come back out. That's 3, yarn over, into the loop, come back out. There's 4. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take your hook with all of these loops on it, grab your yarn, and pull it through all of the loops on your hook. So you should only have 1 loop after that still on your hook, and then chain of 1 to close your cute little puff. Now we're going to chain 2. If you think about it, closing that puff was a chain of 1, and then you did a chain of 2. So really you can combine that into a chain of 3, similar to your granny corner. We're going to begin our next puff stitch. Instead of that chain of 2 is going to be a double crochet. We yarn over and go into the center of our ring and do a double crochet out of the center there. Now we begin our puff again. So yarn over, into the ring, grab a yarn, pull it back out 1, yarn over, into the ring, pull it back out 2, yarn over, into the ring, pull it back out 3, yarn over, into the ring, pull it back out 4. Now we're going to grab our yarn and in one fell swoop pull it all the way through all the stitches on our hook so that we only have 1 left, and then we are going to chain 3. 1, 2, 3. And now we're ready to go again. We begin our 3rd puff stitch cluster with a double crochet into the center of the ring, and then we're going to do our puff stitch again. Yarn over, into the center, pull it out. 2, 3, 4, and then we're going to grab our yarn and pull it all the way through. And I think a nice way to do it, because you can get stuck, is to grab it and turn your hook downward as you're pulling through. And that will keep it from getting caught. If you pull it with your hook upwards, you might grab some of the other loops. So if you just put it downwards and it's towards the top, makes it a lot easier. That does take a little bit of practice, so just keep going. Then we're gonna do our chain of 3. 1, 2, 3. We now have 3 puff stitch clusters. We're gonna yarn over and do our 4th with our double crochet right in the center. Puff stitch of 4, yarn over, into the center, out 1, yarn over, into the center 2, yarn over, into the center 3, yarn over, into the center 4. We're going to pull through again, and then we're going to do our chain of 3. 1, 2, 3, We're finishing our first round, so we're gonna go and find the top of that chain of 2 that we started with, and we're just gonna do a slip stitch through there, and we have our first round of our puffed granny square. If you were changing your yarn, this is a great time to pull the yarn through in a little slip knot, cut it, and then start again in an open space. But for this example, I'm gonna keep going. You'd normally creep your yarn behind, you can do that, or since the top of that puff stitch is really just one stitch, if you do a slip stitch back into that empty hole there, you aren't creating any extra bulk on that. So that's what I'll do to just hop over to the new space. We're beginning the second round, so we're gonna begin with a chain of 2 in the place of our usual double crochet. And now we're in the corner, a lot like your usual granny square, and we're gonna do our puff stitch of 4. Yarn over 1, 2, 3, 4. Grab your yarn, pull it through. And then this is our first corner, so we're gonna chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Now in this same space, because we're forming this corner here, we're going to do another full puff stitch starting with a double crochet in that same space. 1, 2, 3, 4. Grab your yarn, pull it all the way through, but wait. This would be when we're gonna change to the other corner here. And in your traditional granny square, you're probably gonna do at least a chain of 2, but we want something that's a little bit tighter here because we keep saying tension, right? Spine, structure, scaffolding, all of these things. We want it to be a little bit tighter. So we're only gonna do a chain of 1, and then we're immediately gonna jump into this next corner here with our next double crochet, and then begin the puff stitch in that corner. 1, 2, 3, 4. Grab our yarn, pull it through. We have now jumped this side and are starting to form the familiar granny square shape. But since we're on the corner, we're gonna do a chain of 3, 1, 2, 3, and then go back into the same space with our double crochet, and then puff of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pull the yarn through. We're now on another side, so we're only gonna do a chain of 1 to skip over, yarn over, and then in our new space, begin the next double crochet, then 4 puffs. 1, 2, 3, 4. Grab the yarn, pull through. We're on a corner again. 1, 2, 3. Chain of 3. And then we're gonna do another puff stitch in that same corner. Double crochet, puff of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Grab that yarn, pull it through. And again, we're on a side, so we're only gonna do a chain of 1, and then hop into this other space here to do our last corner. What you can see developing is that anytime you're on a corner, you're gonna do a chain of 3 between your puff stitches. Anytime you're on a side, you're just gonna do a chain of 1. And this is gonna repeat for the rest of the square. So just like a normal granny square, that space between the puffs, that chain of 1, is what gives us our space for our non-corner puffs, and then on the corner, that chain of 3 gives us space for our corner puffs. We just keep going. We work these in clusters a bit differently than your granny square. We have like a cluster of puffs instead. They're all a little bit too big for the space they occupy. That's why they start puffing out a bit. When you're doing a round of puffs, they might look a little bit flat, like a little sad ravioli. Just give it a minute. On the next round, when you come back through and are kind of squeezing it all together, it'll help it all lift up and become exactly what you want it to be. So sad ravioli will go away, just give it a minute. And there we have 4 rounds. I think 6 rounds is great. Any bigger than 6 rounds and you lose that lovely tension. Smaller than 6 and it just feels like it's more work. And the last round is going to be exactly the same. You want your puffs to kind of snap into place like a good ponytail. That's how you know it's doing its job. Now, if we compare her to a regular granny square, there's just not nearly as much give with this puff structure. It's tighter, but there's also something just elevated about the puff stitch. She looks like she's ready for Fashion Week. This one's not gonna droop, it's not gonna warp, and with it we can build some incredible things. So what I'm working on now is something that you had voted on. If you get the newsletter, you know that on Wednesdays, showing you what I'm working on and then asking what I should be making next. And I had been making a ton of the more colorful puff granny squares. And the #1 vote was that I should make a pair of puffed granny square trousers, which it's funny because I love making trousers. When I say trousers, I mean pants. Pants in regular fashion, I'm a bit obsessed because I have a hard time, I think like most of the world, finding pants that fit. So I love making trousers, but for some reason I just hadn't made any crochet pants. And I think one of the reasons was because I did want to do a granny square pair, but that also means, you know, a full pair of pants that's going to be a lot of granny squares and really heavy. So I wanted to make sure I could support the structure. So you voted and said I should do it. So that's what I'm working on and what I have been doing while we've been chatting for the first little waist piece. Okay, so this is supposed to be for this lower part before the legs split. So let's see. I think it might actually be a little bit too wide the way I did it. I probably could lose one of them, but the goal right now is to have it be kind of a belt. Yeah, I think I'm gonna need to lose probably one solid granny square there. But the important part is we've started. Have some really exciting design ideas that might be a little bit less conventional than your usual granny square trousers. You'll have to wait and see on that. And to keep up with everything that's going on with the Stitch Lab, make sure you sign up for that newsletter. And of course, if you want to come and crochet with me, be the first person to be able to test out new patterns, check out the Stitch Lab sign up. But of course, the highlight of this month for me was designing that puffed granny t-shirt to get that just easy oversized shape. It's an incredible piece and the process of making it was wild. We're gonna be taking these very structured granny squares using a puff stitch to create an oversized t-shirt, but this is gonna be anything but just a series of boxes put together into another boxy shape. I am using a t-shirt design that I came up with and then recut into a toile, which is just this muslin fabric, so that you can really clearly see kind of what we're doing. I had estimated the amount of granny squares that I might need. I guessed around 40, and I decided I wanted to do a striped motif. I did 8 of each color, but then I got a little bit lazy and only did 1, 2, 3. Only 5 of the light pinks, so we'll see if we need more. The first step is really to start laying things out and try to see how much of the t-shirt we can just cover as is with the pieces that we have, starting with generally the most basic shape. It's always good to start with the things that are hardest to fix and most important to get right. So the neckline was first up. On a first pass, this neckline looks too wide. So I'm gonna try this again with one of these colors centered. Is that enough space to get your head through? Looks a little tight. So maybe the solution's actually on the back. If I flip this over, the only things I really need to have stay in place are these two here. In order to expand the neckline and to reflect the fact that the back of the garment is a little bit wider, which you would expect, I'm offsetting the squares and using what I thought was originally going to be the pattern on the front on the back to see how that will line up. The neckline and the sleeves are undoubtedly the trickiest part of this. So I'm going to start with kind of that back shoulder piece here, and I'm going to join these pieces together so that I can start taking a look and seeing if this is going to fit the way I want it to. I've already come up with kind of what I want my joining stitch to be. It's going to be a slip stitch through the outer edge of each of the stitches so that it looks like they're just kind of floating next to each other and is pretty much invisible. Yes, I'm testing if they're coming together, but also it's like, why not start building the piece as we go? Starting with the neckline because it will dictate the way everything else lines up on the pattern. We generally want the squares to be joined evenly and in even stripes. I had that back that I joined together, and then I have these little over the shoulder pieces. So I just want to line up the rest of the squares and make sure the front's gonna look fairly cohesive. And now we should give it a little try on. What I'm testing right now is to see if my head fits through the hole, which it does. But I think this is gonna be a really comfortable neckline. So this is a great foundation. We're off to a really, really good start. If you look at how I've joined this back neckline, suddenly I can kind of squeeze this into almost the full space here so that the pieces do start lining up, which will make sure our sleeves end up being the same length. But what it does mean is that the back is going to be a little bit wider than the front, which is actually very normal when you're dealing with the top of the shoulders, which is exciting. We're on a quest to get to the sleeves, the next hardest part. So that means joining lots of squares to try to finish that shoulder and start reaching the outside of that sleeve. And as soon as that's done, you guessed it, we're trying it on. It's always good to keep kind of double checking, popping it on throughout to just make sure it's accomplishing what we want it to. When we think about sleeves, especially in granny square garments, they often end up as just rectangles, but that can actually create a lot of tension at the shoulder line and in the underarm. But if you take a square like this and you fold it in half, it becomes a bit of a diamond shape, which is something called a gusset and is used in different places of a garment to give you a little bit more space and shaping. So in the crotch, in the underarm, so there's more mobility. So this is the back of the sleeve, the front of the sleeve. So I'm going to try it right here to connect the underarm to the back and allow you some more movement without adding too much volume to the sleeve. So when I was laying it out flat, it looked like if I put a gusset right there, that should give me some nice shaping. I think I still need one more length for the sleeve if I'm really being true to the piece that I'm copying. So I'll show you how it fits here. Yeah, so it's meant to hit right at about the elbow and then have this little drop shoulder. I have one side of the gusset and then I'm actually going to turn everything inside out, fold this square so that it's now this triangular shape, and then attach it on the other side. I should be able to check it. Is the armhole still only be those 4 squares? I love the colors on this, but here's where, you know, things don't quite meet expectations. Since I did offset this versus the initial plan, I'm gonna need one more row of pink here, which is fine. But if you remember from my stacks earlier, that's the only color that I didn't make 8 squares in. So I think I need two more at least. So I'm gonna do that real quick. Both sleeves are gusseted with this little piece underneath here, and I think it's looking fantastic. Now that that tricky part of the sleeve and the neckline is done, we can just go back to our flat piece to find out how to add the rest of the squares. Now you can actually start to see the shape coming together. So for the rest of the body, it should be pretty straightforward. Down to there, and just start kind of laying out where the squares are gonna be. Now I did say that I had 8 per color, and if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, there's already 2 on the back, so that's 6, 7, so I'm gonna need more than I had initially made. Okay, so we're almost done with the body. Oh, and I ran out of yarn for this color, but luckily I found like just enough to get it finished. Here is where we're at the moment. This is the length it's gonna be. I wanna be able to just kind of tuck it in and blouse it, and that's great. We're joining the final body pieces together. Francis has given the pattern his seat of approval. Front and the back are in one solid piece. I didn't join the sides quite yet because I wanted to see how we're gonna join this underarm piece. Adding that little diamond or gusset piece under the arm was always going to be an interesting join situation, so I decided to try it 2 different ways. On one side, with the entire piece evenly joined to another full granny square down the side, and then the second option was joined unevenly, so it only takes up half of the length of a granny square on the side. Okay, the first side is done, and I just wanted to check, and it is looking so amazing and so comfortable. I don't really want to take it off. The uneven half a join ended up looking better, so I went with that and made sure to use my stitch markers to indicate exactly how much of the granny square I was going to be joining to, so that it was even on both sides. And since this gusset piece is joining to only half of the larger square, I'm trying to fit 2 stitches on this side for every 1 stitch over here. I just go through each stitch twice and do a really simple little slip stitch just through those outer loops. So this is actually the first time that I'm filming the whole making of the pattern on camera, and it's really scary. Whether you're designing something without a pattern, just making something, we all go through those stages of wondering if it's gonna work and just being uncertain and unsure. And so I've had it mapped out in my head, but I haven't actually done it yet. I think this is a really relatable feeling when you're in the middle of a project and you're like, is this going to work? Have I, spent all this time and it's not gonna fit, or something like that? Drop in the comments if you can relate, but I just wanted to let you know that that feeling is very universal. Okay, so full t-shirt try on. This is so soft. It does have a little bit of weight to it, but I'm not mad at this at all. Naturally, your squares are gonna have a little bit of like a bubble to them, but that'll relax. I think the sleeve shape is actually kind of fantastic. The fit is boxy without being shapeless, which is exactly what we are going for. So the next big thing to tackle is the collar. So I'm going to use the same stitch here, but slightly rounding the corners here, because this will naturally help it form a nice round shape. We covered that flat circle math in our hyperbolic crochet ruffles explained video. We're going to use some of our flat circle math to decrease it in a way that will make it so it lays flat as we're wearing it. As I'm doing a lot of this, I'm trying to think about how in the next step I'm going to accomplish a decrease using my puff stitch. So I think the next round we might need to do a little bit more testing, because I don't know how that's going to work. And instead of putting a puff stitch in the corner like here, I think I'm actually going to skip this corner and join it in here, because then that's going to start really distributing that curve a little bit more. Yeah, and there we are. It's much, much nicer here than it was leaving that space open. So there really is a ton of trial and error when I'm doing this. It's not like I have it totally dialed in all of the time for everything. Give it a little clip. And we could jump in to do the second round of the collar, but I think we really should pop it on, since again, we're just kind of testing as we go to see how that shape is working. By skipping that stitch in the back here, we really have rounded out the back of that shoulder, which is really nice, but it still looks like the front is pretty square and boxy. Our next step is to try to round out that front bit. So for our flat circle math, we usually say that you want to decrease on a multiple of 6. We have 28, we want to decrease every 6 stitches, which means we should decrease roughly like 4.6 times or 5 times. We're going to start our second round with that in mind. If you're wondering why I care so much about the math of the collar, it's really because collars are hard enough on their own, let alone trying to get them to lay flat. So let's take a look and see. I'm a teeny bit worried because I think the back is looking gorgeous, and I feel like I need to go back and undo this and then not have this corner one here, and then our shaping would be a lot better. So I think that's what I'm gonna have to do. Unravel time. So I'm gonna unravel to that first corner. But instead of adding a puff, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do that first little, where I kind of like do a weird double crochet thing to bring it all together, and then do the puff stitch in the second hole there. And see, we've already tightened it up a bit, and I think it's looking better. Already it's looking curvier. Yeah, that's sitting a lot nicer. So round 2 is done. This is the reality of making your own patterns, trying to figure out how to turn a square into a circle. I was doing the increases faster on the second round, and it's really starting to curve, especially at that bottom. Look how gorgeous. This top part Not quite. But I'm wondering if on that very first round, I had found a way to make it a multiple of 6. Who said you'd never do math in art? Okay, so you have 21. I reduce every 6 stitches. I'm reducing 3 times. And you can already see when you hold it up with a little bit of weight too, that the collar is curving really, really nicely. So even though I'm nitpicking about how curved, it's laying really, really flat, which is exactly what we want. We've gotten down to our multiple of 6 on the collar, but on this round, it's like, it's a little bit snug around my head. It's too tight. I'd say 18, too small. I'm gonna take it all apart again, just the collar, and do it one more time. I took it back up to 30 last night. I think this is proof that things, despite popular opinion, don't always work out the first time. Yes, I could have figured this out and then just told you, you know, in a pattern, do this because it makes it rounder or something, but I think there's so much more value in watching the questions unfold and getting to see, you know, how you actually troubleshoot these types of issues. So I did where I increased to 30 and then did the reduction by every 6 stitches for 3 rounds. If you look at how it's actually laying on top of my t-shirt collar underneath, it actually is kind of reflecting the shape of that. I could stop here, but I'm not going to. I want this to feel like a true sweater t-shirt collar, which means it needs to be double-sided. And while I think in knitting a lot, people do collars that are folded over, I don't think we do it quite enough in crochet. And by doing those 3 rounds back in, you'll see a contrasting color through, which I think will look really cool. And then make it so when this is just the only thing against my skin, it's really comfy. So I'm not getting like an edge here, I'm actually getting something that's folded and soft up against my neck, which if I'm going for like a t-shirt feel, comfort is paramount. I'm going to do 3 more rounds to fold over the collar, not do any decreases the first round. So just give it a matching round. And then I'm going to increase every 6 stitches. So basically reverse exactly what I just did to try to then force a different circle shape. But this is fun, right? To actually see the problems. I just want to wear this already. It's just extra motivation to get it done. And if you've enjoyed this process of crocheting with me, I do have a crochet community called the Stitch Lab. Check out the link below. I would love to crochet with you there. And since I did about a million color changes on this, I'm just gonna go through and weave in some ends quickly. All of the back sides of the puffs you don't see, so you can just hide your extra yarn strands as you're changing colors really easily and no one will know they're there. Look on this round how curvy she got just by doing 1 more round like that. This is gonna fold in, fold over. So I just finished this 2nd round and you can already see, look at it, it's expanding, but as soon as we actually let it curl, it just naturally wants to do that. And again, every 6 stitches do an increase. Next round is done. I want to try it on and just see how we're looking. It's gonna look super funky just like this. And remember, we know that because we want it to curl. So if I do that, see, look, it just naturally finds its edge there and is so nice and puffy. So I left myself a really, really long tail there in order to be able to start joining this all together. What I want to do, at multiple points throughout the collar, I want to evenly distribute this because it may not perfectly align with that original shape. Hopefully my fashion knowledge will help a little bit, because something called a twisted collar, where basically the inside edge doesn't match up to the outside edge, is really common. Our last round, it's a circle, has nothing to do with the way that original collar shape was distributed. So we need to make sure that we're lining up certain points. We should have the same amount of clusters, but not in the same places. I'm gonna take my handy dandy little stitch markers and I'm just gonna put them in key places around the collar of the t-shirt to make sure that everything's lining up. And I think this is actually gonna be a lot easier to do if it's inside out. So I'm gonna take this outer edge, I know my fold is this orange one here, and I'm gonna line, it's a double cluster, up with what is the center back line of my garment. And then I'm just gonna take a stitch marker to just hold that in place. And then I'm going to do the same with the very front center, since that's probably also the most important place to make sure that everything isn't twisted. And we're going to fold this over, find that top bit. Or actually, where's the center of this one? Right here. And since I'm doing it from the inside, I also don't have to worry about anything showing through and stretching anything out. Turn it back to the outside. It also looks like it's sitting really nicely. What's weird here is that I have the kind of like chain ends of the stitches, and then I have the puff stitches here. I'm gonna see if I can kind of hook it up with this line of the top puff stitches, so I just have something a little bit easier to work through. Like all good things in crochet, we're just gonna wing it a bit. But this corner is actually gonna be really important, that we get everything nice and tight to that true corner of where all of the pieces join together, because that is really going to help round out our collar. Take a look on the other side, and the effect's really nice. You're just getting that little bit of blue through. So I'm just gonna keep going around, but I'm already really happy that I have this marker in here, because otherwise who knows how these would be distributed. Part way around, and I've already figured out that having the stitch markers in the corners, see all the way down here is where it needs to go. Since I did use matching yarn for that first round, it's kind of hard to see where those are. Maybe I should have used a different color. I'm kind of grabbing the back loop on the front pieces, and then I'm grabbing just the entire top of the back pieces, but not an exact science. For now, I'm coming up with the shape and then the math to make sure everything's perfect. That I know exactly how you have to distribute the joins and things like that comes later. Maybe I should do more of these behind the scenes, what the pattern development process looks like. What do you think? You tell me. At some point, I'm gonna have to remember all of this, and it's usually like a what the heck was I thinking moment. But since I'm explaining it to you, I can just go back and watch this and be like, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking, rather than having to just guess. So if you're enjoying this, let me know, hit that like button. I think I might actually have found a purpose for this in my life too. Oh, whoa, I'm almost done. I didn't even notice. Okay, so I'm gonna show you something that's a little bit ugly at the moment. This is my rather ugly joining stitch. You can see the separate line here all the way around, and it should look pretty smooth. It's looking so good. Okay, we have to try it on. Ditching this for a second. Moment of truth. Okay, so she's not laying absolutely perfectly flat. This looks like it kind of extends a bit more. So the collar is done, and now it's time to take it apart and do it over again. Before you freak out, let me explain why. Thinking like a designer here, it's really hard to see where the collar starts when you're joining it back together if that first round on the collar is the same color yarn. So if I just made it a different color, not only will you be able to see better where the collar is, but that's also a great tip for somebody who's walking through a pattern to make it a lot easier. If that's a contrast color, you know exactly where it's gonna line up. So if I was just making a sweater, I would stop here, but I'm not just making a sweater. I'm making a pattern that I want other people to be able to enjoy as well. And so these little things are things that it's worth it to me to do. So even though yes, it's joined together, and yes, I did weave in the ends, I should have known better, it's time to do this one more time. So I redid the whole thing. It's a bit of the Goldilocks methodology here of, 18 stitches was too tight, pushing it out to 30 was too big, and so now I've got it absolutely perfect. Really does matter when you're creating a pattern that not only you want to be fun to make, but also fun to wear. I haven't tried it on yet, so I'm really excited to show you. We still have that double fold over with the color peeking through. Being a perfectionist with this kind of stuff, I think only helps you in terms of pattern making. For a moment, I was contemplating not changing everything, then I was like, well, what the heck am I thinking? So what's neat too is I've done all these different colors, and they actually do kind of peek through, which is really fun. This sits a lot flatter on the sides. I still think it's gonna stretch out a little bit and be a little less square, but it really rounds nicely around the collar, feels incredibly comfortable. And the joining process is a million times easier because you can see I have a contrast color to demonstrate to you there. From a pattern making perspective, this is a much better choice. So now that I've gone in and Goldilocks the collar for the final time, I'm now gonna do the hem on the sleeves and the waistband. One of the reasons we're gonna do one more final puff is the same reason why you do a border stitch on a granny square blanket, and it's because you do have all these pieces you've joined together and you know, you hope everything is perfect and even, but in reality it probably isn't. So just one more round to create a border, which in this case we're gonna do with the puff stitch, will really make it smooth and make all those pieces just look like they're one rather than like you have seamed together a bunch of granny squares. Should be really quick. I'm just gonna go around and do a puff stitch in every space here. Now we did start this out as a pattern where we're just trying to like replicate an existing piece. It's a lot more straightforward when it's more about like, if I do this, does this match what I'm looking at? Versus does this give the effect that I'm looking for, which I think becomes more of the designer side of things. But in this case, it's more of a design idea I had in my head. So much more subjective in terms of whether you've accomplished that or not. Okay, so drop in the comments what you thought of this process. It's super fancy schmancy reveal time, which means I have put back on our original little prototype toile to see how it measures up. I haven't fully woven in all the ends yet, but we'll get there. Dang, it's just so like spot on. You can't even really see the toile underneath. There it is, just barely out the edge of the sleeves. I think it's just about perfect. Let's step back a minute so you can see the hem, but it fits better without this underneath because this stuff is so stiff. Even after all of that, I still made one more change. The gusset, that square piece, had been joined to about half the space it was supposed to fill. So I took away some rounds until it perfectly evenly fit there. And see, what you get is that same really nice drape in shape, but without too much fabric when you're designing things. I love wearing them around and then seeing like what irritates me and then changing it, because then that's how you get to like the perfect pieces that you're gonna absolutely love to wear. If you've enjoyed this little monthly dispatch, let me know in the comments below. I can't wait to share more fun crochet projects with you. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That's like a thing. I'm Lee, happy crocheting, and I will see you next time.